When we were about 6-7 miles from Mallorca, the boat sank. So basically I ended up on a piece of wood. There was the owner and me. We ended up like separating. And I spoke to the helicopter guy that picked him up. He said it was the first time in 12 years of service that he ever picked up anyone, dead or alive. That's when it first kicked in with me, how bad the situation was. My name is Melin. I was a captain for 20 years. And then it was that I started in OS. I wouldn't say I feared for my life, but I've had maybe a couple of situations that were a bit extreme, to say the least. In 2002, I did a delivery of a boat from the mainland to here. The boat wasn't in very good condition, so when we were about 6-7 miles from Mallorca, the boat sank. So basically I ended up on a piece of wood and I spent the night on that piece of wood, and luckily there was a fishing boat that came out the next morning. I saw them more than they saw me, and they picked me up, and yeah, there was the owner and me, but he ended up in another piece of wood, so he drifted off, away from where I was. So and then when I was collected, he hadn't been found yet, so I told him more or less because it seemed like he was more affected by the waves, where I was more affected by the current, so we ended up like separating. I did try to swim towards him at one point, but then I realized how cold the water was, so I went back to my piece of wood. After I was picked up, they contacted the helicopter, and he was found within more or less half an hour after I was picked up. I mean, he had a bit of dehydration because this was the 9th of March. So the water is probably when the water is the coldest around Mallorca. I wasn't in the water because the piece of wood was, the one I was on was about 2 meters. Yeah. I was 15 hours. It happened around 4-5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was collected about 9:30 the next morning. I was convinced that that was it. It was a question of, I thought, okay, what is going to kick in first, hypothermia or whatever? But I thought it was just a question of hours. I was in that situation, and and there was even a big boat that came past me during the night, but it doesn't see anything, or that's the fishermen. What they did, it was because the bad weather kicked in. And they were out fishing, and then they sought shelter in Puerto de Andratx. They came out of Sóller and then went in Puerto de Andratx. So they came out of Puerto de Andratx that next morning to start, but they didn't even see me. I mean, I could see them. They were getting ready and they were sailing, and I was like, they asked me if I was the one from yesterday. I said, no, I came out this morning to do a bit of surfing. So they had heard about it the day before. Well, the thing is, it started very quickly because basically the boat was a wooden boat and it was a bit rotten. When it hit one of the waves, the first time I already told the owner to go down into the cabins to check if everything was okay. He came back up and said, yeah, everything is fine. Then the second wave hit, which was harder. And then I said to him, and when I just about to say it, I could feel that the boat already went like, I thought, oh shit, something. And then it actually, the beginning went quite quick, but then because it's wood, then it's like it floated for quite a bit, because I think the hull separated from the superstructure. And I still, in all this time, I managed to keep dry. Then I was on the fly bridge, and that separated as well. So there was only what was left of the fly bridge, which even turned around, but I managed to keep dry. But all of this took 3/4 of an hour, something like that. So and the bottom part, that sunk because it had the engines. So when it separated from the top from the bottom, that's why, I mean, luckily, you can say, in a way, it's wood. It was rotten, but at the same time, since wood floats, then also that's why there was something to, yeah. The phone I had was low on battery, and the thing is, it was a Nokia. I remember there was the first Nokia that it was actually submergible, because it had a rubber thing around, but it was low on battery. So every time I was calling the emergency number, the 112, what they do, they pass you on to the, let's say, the coastal service. So every time they were doing that, the phone was cutting out. So yeah, it was a bit like that. And then when they were searching too close to shore. I mean, I could see the helicopter the night before, but it was going back and forwards, but too close to shore. So yeah, it was a bit, yeah. And the life raft that was on board didn't work. The flares, some of them worked, and this was it's a bit incredible, but when I was picked up, one of them said, actually did say, yes, we saw the flare, but I had to ignore it because for me, I mean, because they were standing apparently in San Telmo looking out, and they actually, let's say I think they did see a flare at one point. I can ask the same question, why, but I didn't want to react because then I would have reacted in a different way. So I let it fly over my head. The other guy, the owner, did a party, let's say, to celebrate the 1 year after this happened. And I spoke to the helicopter guy that picked him up, and he said it was the first time in 12 years of service that he ever picked up anyone, dead or alive. And he'd been in service for 12 years. That's when it first kicked in with me, actually, how bad the situation was. A month later, I did a trip to Sardinia with a boat. I delivered a boat to Sardinia, which is twice the distance what I did. And I didn't think of it, but I think it kicked in first a long time after, and especially when I spoke to the helicopter guy that said it's the first time he's ever picked anyone up of all the times, and he must have been out quite a few times and never found anyone. Then is when you realize how serious it is. So yes, checklist would be that all the safety equipment is been serviced and that it is in good working order. Just check that everything is working and that everything has been checked properly, before leaving on a longer trip. We are the ones, but we can't really tell the crew or the people what they have to do, because they should know what they should do, because they should do drills every month or every so often on board. And I think in a lot of boats, they don't do them. It doesn't get done often enough. And it's very easy. I mean, they have implemented, but those are more the people that organizes the courses. Because when I took my certificates, you didn't have to revalidate that often, but now it's become more mandatory that there is a refreshment every so often. So that means you get to do the fire drills more often, you get to do the sea survival a bit more often. It should be done basically more often because it's easy to forget. Because I would say on the boat, the most important is that you do everything because of routine. So that means it's also important to do that part as a routine, because otherwise you run around like a headless chicken if something happens. And I know that because I tried it myself, yeah. So we are supposed to know the Spanish regulations, which as you also know, you can look at everything up in El Boe. That's not an easy task sometimes to look for things. Try to download the latest legislations that comes out. But we don't get, because for example, the people that work on boats, they do get notices from the MCA, for example, in UK, to update the regulations. So it is tricky with some flags because we don't know how to look it up, but we try to, with the flags that are the most common, to keep ourselves updated of what is needed. After I had that experience, and like I said, the first year it didn't affect me, but after that first year, I did have very difficult to go to sleep the night before if I was going on a trip. Yeah, well, not nightmares, but yeah, the thought did come back more, like I said, more after a year than what it did in the first year. And now, I would say now, since I stopped being on boats, it hasn't happened anymore. At the time we were in contact, like once a year, like on that day, he would normally write to me, he would say, happy birthday, so yeah, we did keep in contact a little bit afterwards. No, this was a still one. He learned the lesson, and the other lesson that he learned, he bought it here, but he never left. It was an STP for repairs, but it never got, it never left the port. It stayed there.